Today's story is a tale filled with numerous misadventures, from crocodiles to starting international crises, an honestly incomprehensible amount of incompetency, and lots of friendly fire. Of course, I'm talking about the absurd voyage of the Russian Baltic Fleet during the Russo-Japanese War in the early 20th century. Hello, I'm Yuri, and welcome to Discover History. During the Russo-Japanese War, the Russians, which oh so badly wanted to make the world believe they had a powerful navy, were, surprise surprise, getting a nice spanking from the Japanese, as they were quite a few updates and a DLC behind on modern weaponry. With the war not particularly, or if I'm being honest, going horribly not in their favor, the Tsar was forced to take desperate measures. He ordered the Admiral of the Baltic Fleet, Rozhestvensky, which had his crew always keep a box of spare binoculars because of reasons, to set sail and reinforce Port Arthur. A quick side note, Rozhestvensky was actually a really competent admiral and always stood up for the little guys, the enlisted men, when they suffered abuse from their aristocratic and pompous officers. Anyways, back to the story. The Baltic Fleet was stationed here in modern-day Latvia, and Port Arthur is quite literally on the other side of the globe. Nonetheless, they set sail on their 29,000-kilometer long voyage, and right from the get-go, things went south, as during the very first day, two ships ran aground and another two collided. Obvious foreshadowing for what to expect next aside, the fleet sailed onwards, in a rather anxious state, as the crew feared a sneaky Japanese torpedo boat ambush. In Denmark. So when the inexperienced crew, made up of peasants, spotted a ship sailing right at them, you can imagine their reaction. Without a second of thought, they just started blasting what later turned out to be a message carrier. But no worries, he was completely fine, just a little spooked maybe, as they missed absolutely every shot. And what was the message? A promotion for our dear Admiral. Either way, the Japanese torpedo boat menace remained, and this wouldn't be the only time the crew started frantically blasting, as when they reached Dogger Bank, off the coast of England, their biggest fears turned out to be true: a fleet of Japanese torpedo boats, with nets. 20 minutes of God knows what later, they figured out that what they assumed to be torpedo boats were actually just British fishermen. Besides almost starting a war between Russia and the UK, arguably the more spectacular thing was that they actually hit something. Their own sailor and an Orthodox priest. Still counts, right? A quick pit stop off the coast of Morocco, where the officers did a nice thing for once and bought cigarettes for the sailors to boost morale, they set sail and proceeded to cut the telegraph line connecting Africa and Europe. Because of the whole Dogger Bank incident, the UK didn't allow them to use the Suez Canal, which forced them around the whole of Africa, and because Ashnoff's African colony didn't exactly work out, this forced them to sail with enormous amounts of coal on deck. Of course, coal is completely clean and harmless, so nothing bad happened, besides numerous cases of black lung. Oh, and speaking of lungs, those cigarettes the officers bought back in Morocco. Those were apparently laced with opium, so while sailing around Africa, all the sailors were high as kites. And when the officers figured that out, began getting violently sick from withdrawals. Having spent the last few months at sea, the Admiral decided it's time for a vacation. Shooting at harmless fishermen is hard work after all. They stopped in Madagascar and decided to recreate the penguins of Madagascar. How, you may ask? Well, by bringing every animal they could find aboard. Isn't that right, Crocodile Gianna?
Gena, crocodile.
Unfortunately, Gianna didn't bring them luck. After that whole ordeal, Rozhestvensky was forced to remain in his cabin, suffering from acute nerve pain for 2 weeks, while his chief of staff collapsed from a paralyzing stroke, effectively leaving the fleet without leadership. Leaving Madagascar behind and sailing into the Indian Ocean, more and more accidents just kept happening. They tried doing some target practice by having one of the ships tow a target, and it went, well as you could expect. Not a single hit to the actual target, but a ship towing it. A few holes for ventilation will do nicely, I believe. On a different occasion, when giving a funeral at sea, one of the ships saluting had the same idea. Battered from friendly fire, they eventually reached Vietnam, where they stopped, illegally mind you, and figured out that Port Arthur had already fallen, rendering their entire mission completely pointless. Oh, what a morale boost. Now, on the cusp of mutiny, the fleet couldn't really turn back, as even though they stacked literal mountains of coal, that wouldn't have been enough, and so they just decided to beeline for Vladivostok, directly through the Sea of Japan, because what could possibly go wrong? As they entered the foggy Tsushima Strait, the hospital ship Orel noticed the ship approaching them. Given their amazing track record, the blasting should have started any second, right? Yeah, nope. This time they just blindly assumed it to be friendly and signaled it their exact positions and intentions. Of course, the ship was Japanese, and you can probably guess what happened next. The Battle of Tsushima. Did drill instructor Gena teach them how to actually aim? Did the ventilation holes provide them with the extra oxygen to function properly? Did they valiantly fight back against all odds and persevere? Of course not. It was a devastating defeat for the Russians and effectively ended the war and Russia's ambitions in the Far East. The Baltic Fleet lost most of their ships and over 5,000 sailors died. The Battle of Tsushima ended the absurd voyage of the Russian Baltic Fleet. Besides being an entertaining story for a YouTube video, it actually changed the balance of power and shaped much of the political landscape in early 20th century Europe, reflecting Russia's weakening influence on the world stage and the rise of the Japanese Empire. If you enjoyed the video and would like to listen to more of these stories, subscribe. And in the meantime, check out my other videos. Thank you all very much for watching Discover History.